I was sitting in my living room on a frigid January evening in Bozeman, Montana, watching my portable space heater's orange coils glow, when someone started hammering on my front door like they were trying to break it down. The woman standing on my porch had that specific look about her. Perfectly blown-out blonde hair despite the sub-zero temperatures. A puffy white North Face jacket that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. And the kind of tight-lipped expression that said she was about to ruin somebody's day. That somebody was apparently me. "Quinton Vaughn," she demanded, not asked. "That's me," I said, keeping the door mostly closed because I wasn't about to heat the entire neighborhood. The wind was whipping snow across my driveway, and I could already feel my heating bill climbing. "I'm Patricia Hendricks, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. I'm here about a violation that was reported at your property." I blinked at her. I'd only lived in this development for 8 months, and I'd been careful to follow every ridiculous rule they'd sent me. My grass was maintained to their exact specification of 2.5 inches before the snow came. My mailbox was the approved shade of black. I even made sure my garbage cans were stored in the garage and never visible from the street. "What violation?" I asked. She pulled out her phone and thrust it toward my face. The screen showed a photo of my living room window, taken from the street with my space heater visible inside. "That," she said, jabbing her manicured finger at the screen. "Portable heating devices are strictly prohibited under Section 7, Paragraph C of the HOA bylaws. They're a fire hazard and an eyesore." I stared at her, waiting for her to crack a smile and admit she was joking. She didn't. "You're serious. It's a space heater." "Everyone in Montana has a space heater." "Not in Meadowbrook Hills they don't," Patricia said. Her voice had that syrupy sweet quality that made my teeth hurt. "Our development has standards. We have a centralized heating system that was specifically designed to maintain comfortable temperatures in all units without the need for supplemental heating devices. First of all, these aren't units. They're houses. I own this house." I was trying to keep my voice level, but the absurdity of the situation was getting to me. "Second, that centralized system you're talking about barely keeps my house at 60 degrees when it's below zero outside." "The system is functioning within normal parameters," she said, like she was reading from a script. "Any perceived temperature issues are likely due to user error or inadequate insulation, which would be your responsibility to address." "User error. It's a thermostat. You set it to the temperature you want. Mine's set to 72 and my house is sitting at 60. Patricia's smile got tighter. "Regardless, the space heater needs to be removed from the premises by tomorrow evening, or you'll be fined $500 per day until compliance is achieved." I felt my jaw drop. $500 per day, that's correct. You signed the HOA agreement when you purchased the property. All of this is clearly outlined in the documentation you received. She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Vaughn. We'll be conducting a follow-up inspection in 48 hours. I suggest you ensure full compliance by then." She walked back to her white BMW SUV, and I watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the swirling snow. I stood there in my doorway, cold air rushing past me, trying to process what had just happened. I went back inside and cranked up my thermostat to 75, just to see what would happen. The vents pushed out lukewarm air for about 10 minutes, then seemed to give up entirely. My thermostat stubbornly displayed 61 degrees. That night, I dug out my HOA paperwork from the file cabinet in my spare bedroom. Sure enough, buried in page 37 of a 42-page document, there it was. Portable heating or cooling devices visible from exterior vantage points are prohibited due to aesthetic and safety concerns. I called my buddy Marcus, who'd lived in HOA neighborhoods most of his adult life. "They can't actually enforce that, can they?" I asked him. Marcus laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Oh man, they absolutely can. HOAs have more power than you'd think. If it's in the bylaws you signed, they can fine you into bankruptcy if they want to." "That's insane." "That's America, buddy. You should have read the fine print before you bought the place." I had read it, or at least I thought I had. But 42 pages of legal jargon at 9-point font is designed to make your eyes glaze over. I'd been so excited about finally owning a home after years of renting apartments that I hadn't paid enough attention to the strings attached. The next day, I moved the space heater into my bedroom, away from any windows. I figured if they couldn't see it, they couldn't complain about it. I was wrong. 2 days later, Patricia was back, this time with a weaselly little man in his 50s who she introduced as Gerald, the HOA compliance officer. Apparently, Meadowbrook Hills was large enough to have a full-time employee dedicated to making residents miserable. "We need to conduct an interior inspection," Patricia announced. "No," I said. Her eyebrows shot up like I'd just suggested we sacrifice a goat on the front lawn. "Excuse me. You're not coming into my house without a warrant or my permission, and you don't have either." Gerald stepped forward, clutching his tablet like a security blanket. "Mr. Vaughn, the HOA bylaws explicitly state that compliance officers are permitted to conduct reasonable inspections of properties to ensure adherence to community standards." "Then take me to court," I said. "Until then, you can inspect my property from the street all you want, but you're not setting foot inside my house." I closed the door on their shocked faces. My hands were shaking. I'd never been great with confrontation, but something about their entitled attitudes made my blood boil. For the next week, I kept the space heater hidden and wore extra layers inside my house. The temperature outside had dropped to -15 degrees, and my indoor temperature hovered around 58 despite the thermostat being maxed out. I called the property management company that supposedly maintained the centralized heating system. "I need someone to come look at my heating system," I told the bored-sounding woman who answered the phone. "What seems to be the problem? It's not heating my house adequately." "It's 58 degrees in here. What's your address?" I gave it to her. "Oh, Meadowbrook Hills. Yeah, we've been getting a lot of calls from that development. The system is old and it's not really designed for these extreme cold snaps. Have you tried adjusting your thermostat?" "Of course I have. It's set to the maximum temperature and nothing's happening." "I can put in a work order, but we're backed up about 3 weeks right now. Everyone's having heating issues." 3 weeks? I'll freeze to death in 3 weeks. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's not much else I can do. You could try using a space heater in the meantime." I actually laughed. "Yeah, about that. The HOA won't let me use a space heater." There was a pause. "That's ridiculous. Tell me about it." I hung up and immediately got a notification on my phone. It was from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA app that I'd been forced to download. I had a new message. "Notice of fine. Mr. Quinton Vaughn, 847 Aspen Lane, has been assessed a fine of $500 for continued violation of Section 7, Paragraph C. Payment is due within 30 days. I stared at the notification. They'd fine me even though the space heater wasn't visible from outside. Someone must have seen it before I moved it, or maybe they had some other way of knowing. I wouldn't put it past Patricia to have someone monitoring power usage, or something equally invasive. I drove to the HOA office the next morning. It was located in a small building near the entrance to the development. Right next to the unmanned guard shack, that was supposed to make us all feel safe and exclusive. Patricia was sitting behind a desk, typing on a computer. She looked up when I walked in, and her expression immediately shifted into what I was starting to recognize as her dealing with a peasant face. "Mr. Vaughn, what can I do for you? You can explain how you're fining me for something you can't even see," I said. "We have our methods of ensuring compliance." "That's not an answer." She folded her hands on her desk. "Mr. Vaughn, you seem to be under the impression that this is a negotiation. It's not. The rules are clear. You violated them, you've been fined. If you continue to violate them, you'll continue to be fined. My house is 58 degrees. The heating system doesn't work." "The heating system works fine. Perhaps you need to insulate your attic or seal your windows better." "I've done both. The system is inadequate." Patricia's smile never wavered. "Take it up with the property management company." I did. They said the system is old and can't handle extreme cold. "Then perhaps you should have considered the climate before purchasing a home in Montana." I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a deep breath and tried a different approach. "Patricia, please. It's dangerous for me to be living in a house this cold. I could get hypothermia. All I need is a small space heater to supplement the heating until the weather gets better or until the system can be fixed." "Rules are rules, Mr. Vaughn. If I make an exception for you, I'll have to make exceptions for everyone." "Then make exceptions for everyone. It's a safety issue." "The only safety issue I see is the fire hazard posed by portable heating devices." She turned back to her computer, dismissing me. "Have a nice day, Mr. Vaughn." I left before I said something I'd regret. That afternoon, I got a text from my neighbor, a retired school teacher named Helen who'd lived in Meadowbrook Hills for 5 years. She'd always been friendly, waving when she saw me outside, occasionally bringing over cookies. "I heard about your trouble with the HOA," her text read. "Same thing happened to my son 2 years ago. They fined him $10,000 before he finally gave in. Be careful." "Patricia doesn't forget and she doesn't forgive." I texted back. "Did your son's heating work properly?" "No, ours doesn't either. We just wear a lot of layers and use heated blankets. The HOA banned those 2 last year, but they can't see them, so we're careful." This was insane. I was living in some kind of bizarre dictatorship, where a middle-aged woman with too much time on her hands had more power than elected officials. I spent the next week researching HOA law in Montana. It turned out Patricia was right about one thing. I had signed a contract, and contracts are binding. But there were limits. HOAs couldn't enforce rules that violated health and safety codes, and there were definitely regulations about providing adequate heating to residential properties. I called a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. His name was Thomas Reeves, and his voice on the phone sounded tired, like he'd dealt with this exact situation 1,000 times before. "How cold is your house?" he asked after I'd explained the situation. 58 degrees on average. Sometimes it drops to 55. Montana law requires landlords to maintain rental properties at a minimum of 65 degrees. For owner-occupied properties, it's murkier, but there's definitely an argument to be made that the HOA is violating health and safety standards by preventing you from adequately heating your home. So what can I do? You can fight the fine, but it'll be expensive and time-consuming. HOAs have deep pockets because they're funded by everyone's dues. You're one person. They can outlast you financially almost every time. That doesn't seem fair. It's not, but it's legal. Your best bet is to try to work with them, get the heating system fixed, or sell the house and move somewhere without an HOA. I just bought this place 8 months ago. Then you're probably stuck. I'm sorry. I hung up feeling defeated. I'd saved for years for a down payment on this house. I'd been so proud when I finally got the keys. And now I was trapped in a nightmare of bureaucratic pettiness. The weather got worse. A massive winter storm was moving toward Montana, and the forecasts were predicting record-breaking cold and several feet of snow. The kind of storm that could knock out power and leave people stranded for days. I went to the hardware store and bought extra batteries, non-perishable food, and a camping stove. I also bought 2 more space heaters and extra blankets. If the HOA wanted to fine me, fine. I wasn't going to freeze to death to satisfy Patricia's power trip. The storm hit on a Thursday evening. The snow started around 6 p.m., light at first, then increasingly heavy. By 9 p.m., visibility was near zero and the wind was howling like something alive. The power flickered once, twice, then held steady. I had all 3 space heaters running in my living room, and the temperature had finally climbed to a relatively comfortable 68 degrees. I was eating soup and watching the weather reports when someone started pounding on my door again. I opened it to find Patricia standing there, snow covering her jacket and hair. She looked furious. "I can see those heaters through your window," she shouted over the wind. "This is your final warning, Mr. Vaughn. Remove them immediately, or I'm calling the fire department to have them confiscated as a safety hazard. Are you out of your mind? There's a blizzard happening. Rules don't stop for weather, Mr. Vaughn. Get off my property," I said and slammed the door. She pounded on it for another minute, then gave up. I watched through the window as she trudged back to her SUV and drove away far too fast for the conditions. Around midnight, the power went out. The whole neighborhood went dark simultaneously, and my space heaters died with a sad little clicking sound. I fumbled for my flashlight and checked my phone. The outage map showed that most of Bozeman was affected. Estimated restoration time: unknown. I bundled up in every piece of warm clothing I owned and huddled under 3 blankets on my couch. Without the space heaters, my house would drop to ambient temperature within a few hours. And with no power to run even the inadequate centralized heating system, everyone in Meadowbrook Hills was in the same boat. Everyone including Patricia. I tried to sleep, but mostly just shivered. The temperature in my house dropped steadily. By morning, I could see my breath. My phone said it was negative 22 degrees outside, with wind chills approaching negative 40. The snow had piled up to about 3 feet, and the wind had created drifts that were much higher. I couldn't see any of my neighbors' houses through the whiteout conditions. I was effectively trapped. I used my camping stove to heat some coffee and instant oatmeal, careful to crack a window to prevent carbon monoxide buildup. The heat from the little stove was pathetic compared to what I needed, but it was better than nothing. Around 10 a.m., my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mr. Vaughn. This is Sandra from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA office. I'm calling on behalf of Patricia Hendricks." "What does she want now?" I asked. Sandra's voice was hesitant, professional, but clearly uncomfortable. "We're experiencing a community-wide emergency due to the power outage. The centralized heating system is completely non-functional. Patricia wanted me to contact all residents to remind them that HOA rules remain in effect during emergencies, and any violations will be documented and addressed once the situation is resolved." I actually laughed. "You've got to be kidding me. I'm just relaying the message, sir. Tell Patricia that I hope she's staying warm in her house with no heat. Actually, Mrs. Hendricks has a backup generator and a fireplace, so she's managing fine. Of course she did. Is there anything else?" I asked. "That's all. Stay safe." She hung up. I spent the rest of the day trying to stay warm. I did jumping jacks, push-ups, anything to keep my blood moving. I ate constantly, trying to generate body heat from calories. By evening, the temperature in my house had dropped to 38 degrees according to the thermometer on my wall. My phone battery was at 15%. The cell towers were clearly struggling because I kept losing signal. I sent a text to Marcus letting him know I was okay, then powered down my phone to save battery. Night was brutal. I couldn't sleep because I was too cold. I put on every piece of clothing I owned, wrapped myself in every blanket, and still shivered uncontrollably. My fingers and toes went numb. My face hurt from the cold. This was genuinely dangerous territory now. Around 3 a.m., I heard sirens somewhere in the distance. I wondered if someone else in the neighborhood was in trouble. Morning came slowly. The storm had finally passed, but the damage was done. The temperature outside had dropped to negative 30 degrees. Inside, my house was now at 33 degrees. Water was freezing in my toilet bowl. I heard a vehicle outside and looked out to see a snowplow slowly making its way down the street. Behind it was an ambulance, lights flashing. I pulled on my boots and coat and trudged outside, my legs cramping from the cold. Several of my neighbors were emerging from their houses too, everyone looking haggard and half frozen. The ambulance stopped 3 houses down from mine. Paramedics rushed inside, and a few minutes later, they emerged with an elderly man on a stretcher. I recognized him as Robert Chen, a retired engineer who lived alone. He wasn't moving. Helen appeared next to me, her face pale. "That's the third one," she said quietly. "Third what?" "Third medical emergency this morning. 2 houses over, a woman with diabetes couldn't keep her insulin at the right temperature. She went into some kind of shock. And on Birch Street, a family with a newborn baby called 911 because the baby's temperature dropped to dangerous levels. Is everyone okay? I don't know. The ambulances keep coming. As if on cue, another ambulance appeared, heading toward a different part of the development. A county emergency vehicle pulled up, and a man in a heavy parka got out with a megaphone. "Attention, Meadowbrook Hills residents. We're establishing a warming shelter at the community center on Ridge Road. If you're unable to maintain safe temperatures in your homes, please make your way there. We have generators, heat, hot food, and medical personnel available." People started trudging toward their cars, trying to dig them out from the snow. I went back inside, grabbed my emergency bag, and joined the exodus. The community center was about 2 miles away, normally a 5-minute drive, but it took 30 minutes in the post-storm conditions. The roads were barely passable, and everyone was driving slowly and carefully. Inside the warming shelter, it was crowded and chaotic but blessedly warm. Red Cross volunteers were handing out hot coffee and soup. Families huddled together on cots. People charged their phones at power strips set up along the walls. I spotted Helen sitting on a folding chair, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. I sat down next to her. "How's your house?" I asked. 35 degrees when I left. The pipes in my bathroom burst. There's water everywhere, but it froze almost immediately, so at least it's not flooding anymore. "I'm sorry," she shrugged. "I have insurance, probably, I hope." A television mounted on the wall was showing the local news. The anchor was discussing the storm's impact. Widespread power outages, dozens of people hospitalized for hypothermia and cold-related injuries, and at least 3 confirmed deaths in the Bozeman area. One of those deaths had been Robert Chen. The newscaster reported that he'd been found unresponsive in his home, which had reached 18 degrees overnight. Cause of death was listed as hypothermia. The room went quiet as people processed that information. Some of the residents I recognized from Meadowbrook Hills were crying. Robert had been everyone's neighbor, a friendly face who always cleared snow from the sidewalks in front of his house and the houses next to him. "This is Patricia's fault," someone muttered loud enough for others to hear. I turned to see a younger man, maybe early 30s, sitting nearby. His name was Jason something. I'd met him once at a neighborhood barbecue over the summer. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew exactly what he meant. "The HOA has been ignoring complaints about the heating system for years," Jason said, his voice getting louder. "I've been on their case for 3 winters now. The system is ancient, it's inadequate, and everyone knows it. But Patricia keeps saying it's fine, that we just need to adjust our expectations or winterize our houses better. She wouldn't let people use space heaters," another voice added. This was a woman I didn't know, maybe in her 50s. "My husband has emphysema. We needed a space heater for his bedroom because the cold aggravates his breathing. Patricia threatened to fine us $500 a day if we didn't remove it." "She did the same thing to me," I said. More voices joined in. It turned out I wasn't the only person Patricia had targeted. She'd been systematically enforcing the no portable heater rule across the entire development, fining people who refused to comply and threatening legal action against anyone who pushed back. "Someone should report her," Helen said quietly. "What she did, what she's been doing, it's criminal negligence." "Who do we report her to?" Jason asked. "The police? The county?" "I don't know, but Robert is dead because he couldn't keep his house warm, and the reason he couldn't keep his house warm is because Patricia wouldn't let him use a space heater and wouldn't fix the heating system." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. Patricia walked in, flanked by Gerald and 2 other people I recognized as members of the HOA board. She looked around the warming shelter with an expression of distaste, like she just walked into a homeless encampment. The room went silent. Everyone was staring at her. "I need everyone's attention," Patricia announced, not bothering to use the voice she used to fake politeness. "Once power is restored and the emergency is over, all residents need to return to their homes and await instructions from the HOA regarding property inspections. We need to assess any damage and ensure that all homes meet safety standards before they can be reoccupied." "You've got some nerve," Jason said, standing up. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me. Robert Chen is dead because of you. That's a baseless accusation and borderline slander." "I had nothing to do with Mr. Chen's unfortunate passing." "You wouldn't let him heat his house," someone else shouted. "The heating system was adequate. If Mr. Chen experienced issues, he should have contacted property management." "He did," Helen said, standing up now too. "We all did. They told us the system was old and inadequate. You knew it was failing and you did nothing. And then you prevented people from using alternative heating when the system couldn't keep up." Patricia's face flushed. "The space heater rule exists for safety reasons. Portable heating devices are a fire hazard." "Robert died of hypothermia," I said, standing up as well. "I'd say freezing to death is a bigger hazard than a space heater." The crowd murmured in agreement. Patricia looked around, clearly realizing she was outnumbered and facing a hostile audience. "This is an emotional time," she said, trying to regain control. "Everyone is cold and scared, but making rash accusations isn't going to help anyone. The HOA is committed to get out," someone shouted. "Yeah, get the hell out," another voice added. Patricia backed toward the door, her entourage following nervously. "You're all still bound by the HOA bylaws," she said. "This isn't over." She left, and the room erupted in angry conversation. A man in a sheriff's deputy uniform who'd been standing near the door walked over to our group. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" Jason, Helen, and I spent the next 30 minutes filling him in on the situation. Other residents joined in, adding their own stories of HOA harassment, inadequate heating, and Patricia's refusal to address the failing system. The deputy took notes and looked increasingly concerned. "This might be something for the county prosecutor," he said. "If there's evidence that the HOA knowingly allowed dangerous conditions to persist and actively prevented residents from protecting themselves, there could be criminal liability." "What kind of criminal liability?" Helen asked. "Potentially negligent homicide, reckless endangerment, maybe other charges. I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen cases like this before. HOAs sometimes think they're above the law." He took down contact information for everyone who wanted to file a complaint, which turned out to be about 30 people. He also made a note of Robert Chen's death and said he'd speak to the detective handling that case. The power came back on that evening. By then, I'd been at the warming shelter for almost 12 hours. I was exhausted, hungry despite the soup and sandwiches they'd been providing, and dreading going back to my frozen house. When I got home, the temperature inside was still hovering around 35 degrees. I turned the thermostat up to maximum and waited. The vents pushed out slightly warm air, and over the next few hours, the temperature climbed slowly to 53 degrees, where it stopped. I plugged in all 3 of my space heaters and didn't care who saw them. Within an hour, my living room was at a comfortable 70 degrees. I made myself a proper meal, took a hot shower that barely stayed warm because my water heater was struggling, and collapsed into bed under a pile of blankets. The next morning, I woke up to find 3 notifications on my phone from the HOA app. Notice of fine, $500 for violation of Section 7, Paragraph C. Notice of fine, $500 for violation of Section 7, Paragraph C. Notice of fine, $500 for violation of Section 7, Paragraph C. 1 fine for each space heater, apparently. $1,500 in total. I took screenshots of the notifications and emailed them to Deputy Marshall, the officer from the warming shelter, along with photos of my thermostat showing 53 degrees despite being set to maximum. 2 days later, I got a call from a woman who identified herself as Assistant County Prosecutor Rebecca Zhang. "Mr. Vaughn, I'm calling about your complaint regarding the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. I've been assigned to investigate potential criminal charges related to the recent storm and Mr. Robert Chen's death." "Okay," I said, not sure what else to say. "I need to ask you some questions about your interactions with the HOA and specifically with Patricia Hendricks." I spent an hour on the phone with her, recounting everything: the initial visit from Patricia, the fines, the threats, the inadequate heating system, and the storm. She asked detailed questions and took careful notes. "One more thing," she said at the end of the call. "Have you paid any of the fines the HOA assessed against you?" "No, not yet. They're not due for a few more weeks." "Don't pay them. If this goes where I think it's going, those fines will be invalidated. And if it doesn't go where you think, then you might be out $1,500, but I have a feeling we won't get to that point." Over the next 2 weeks, things moved surprisingly fast. The county prosecutor's office launched a formal investigation into the HOA. They subpoenaed records showing years of complaints about the heating system, documentation that the property management company had repeatedly warned the HOA that the system was failing, and emails where Patricia had explicitly refused to authorize funding for repairs because it would require raising HOA dues. They also discovered that Patricia had personally profited from the situation. She'd negotiated a contract with the property management company that gave her a kickback for keeping maintenance costs low. Every year she didn't authorize major repairs. She got a bonus of several $1,000s. The story hit the local news. Suddenly, reporters were calling me and other Meadowbrook Hills residents, asking for interviews. I gave one to a local TV station, explaining how I'd been threatened with fines for trying to keep my house warm during a historic winter storm. The segment aired during the evening news and it went viral. Within a day, it had been picked up by national outlets. The narrative was perfect for the outrage cycle. Heartless HOA president lets man die of hypothermia while lining her own pockets. Patricia tried to do damage control, releasing a statement through her lawyer claiming she'd been following the rules and had no way of knowing the storm would be so severe. It didn't help. The court of public opinion had already convicted her. 3 weeks after the storm, Patricia Hendricks was arrested and charged with negligent homicide in the death of Robert Chen, reckless endangerment for her actions during the storm, and several counts of fraud related to the kickback scheme. Gerald, the compliance officer, was charged as an accessory. 2 other HOA board members were charged with lesser offenses for their roles in covering up the heating system problems. The arraignment was brief. Patricia pleaded not guilty to all charges and was released on bail. Her lawyer gave a statement on the courthouse steps about how she was being scapegoated and how this was all a tragic accident that no one could have prevented. I watched the news coverage from my living room, my space heaters still running because the centralized system still barely functioned. The HOA had gone into crisis mode, appointing an interim board and finally authorizing an emergency repair of the heating system. Contractors had been working around the clock for a week, and they were saying it would be at least another month before the system was fully operational. In the meantime, the new interim board had issued a formal statement waiving all fines related to space heaters and explicitly authorizing residents to use whatever supplemental heating they needed. They'd also set up a fund to help residents repair damage from burst pipes and other storm-related issues. The civil lawsuits started rolling in. Robert Chen's family filed a wrongful death suit against the HOA and Patricia personally. Other residents filed suit for property damage, emotional distress, and various other claims. My lawyer, who I'd finally hired, said I had a strong case for harassment and could probably recover damages for the fines, my legal fees, and compensation for the ordeal. The criminal trial took 8 months to get to court. I was called as a witness, along with dozens of other Meadowbrook Hills residents. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Patricia had known the heating system was failing. She'd known that residents couldn't adequately heat their homes. She'd been repeatedly warned by the property management company that the system needed major repairs. And instead of authorizing those repairs, she'd taken kickbacks to keep costs low, and then prevented residents from using alternative heating methods because of an arbitrary aesthetic rule. When the storm hit and the power went out, the combination of an inadequate heating system and the space heater ban had created life-threatening conditions. Robert Chen, who was 78 years old and lived alone, had frozen to death in his own home because he couldn't keep it warm and had been too afraid of HOA fines to use a space heater. Patricia's defense argued that she couldn't have predicted the severity of the storm, that Robert Chen's death was a tragic accident, and that the space heater rule was a reasonable safety precaution. They claimed the kickback arrangement was a standard performance incentive and not indicative of any corrupt intent. The jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they found Patricia guilty of negligent homicide and reckless endangerment. She was acquitted on some of the fraud charges, but the convictions on the main charges were what mattered. At sentencing, the judge was harsh. "Miss Hendricks, you held a position of trust and authority within your community. You had a responsibility to ensure the safety and welfare of the residents under your oversight. Instead, you prioritized money and aesthetics over human life. Your actions directly contributed to the death of Robert Chen and endangered dozens of other people. This court cannot and will not treat such callous disregard for human safety lightly." Patricia was sentenced to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years. She was also ordered to pay restitution to Robert Chen's family and fined $50,000. Gerald got 18 months, and the other board members received probation and community service. The civil suits were settled out of court for undisclosed amounts, but my lawyer said the HOA's insurance company had paid out over $2 million in total. My settlement covered all my fines, my legal fees, and gave me a nice chunk of cash that I used to finally install my own heating system independent of the centralized one that had caused so much trouble. Life in Meadowbrook Hills slowly returned to something resembling normal, but it would never be the same. The HOA underwent massive reforms, including new bylaws that limited its enforcement powers, required regular maintenance of common systems, and established an appeals process for residents who felt they were being unfairly targeted. Several families moved away, unable to shake the trauma of that winter. New people moved in, and the real estate agents were always careful to mention what had happened, making sure buyers knew the full history. Helen stayed. She'd had her house repaired and said she was too old to start over somewhere new. Jason stayed too and actually ran for the HOA board on a platform of transparency and accountability. He won easily. As for me, I stayed as well. My house was finally warm. I'd won my fight against an unjust system, and I'd helped ensure that no one else would have to go through what Robert Chen went through. On the 1-year anniversary of the storm, the new HOA board organized a memorial service for Robert. We gathered at the community center, the same place that had served as a warming shelter that terrible night. People shared memories of Robert, his kindness, his engineering expertise that he'd freely shared with neighbors, his terrible jokes, his dedication to keeping the sidewalks clear. Robert's daughter spoke, her voice breaking. "My father was a careful man. He followed rules. When the HOA told him he couldn't use a space heater, he listened, even though he was cold, even though his house was dangerous. He didn't want to cause trouble." She paused, wiping her eyes. "The fact that following those rules killed him is something I'll never forgive." The room was silent except for quiet crying. "But I want to thank everyone here who fought for change," she continued, "who made sure that what happened to my father wouldn't happen to anyone else. That means something. That matters." After the service, I walked home through the Montana winter evening. It was cold, probably 15 degrees, but my house would be warm when I got there. My new heating system worked perfectly, and if it didn't, I had space heaters and the freedom to use them without fear. I thought about how close I'd come to being Robert, freezing in my own home because someone decided their rules were more important than human safety. I thought about Patricia, sitting in a prison cell, having lost everything because of her greed and ego. I thought about how easily this all could have been avoided if people in power just chose to be decent. The lights were on in Helen's house as I passed. Through the window, I could see her watching television, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. I waved and she waved back, smiling. Life went on. The winters continued to be harsh in Montana, but we were prepared now. The community had learned a hard lesson about the importance of putting people before rules, of valuing safety over aesthetics. of remembering that homes were meant to shelter people from the cold, not trap them in it. I never got another knock on my door from someone demanding I remove my heater. The 3 space heaters I'd bought during the storm sat in my closet now, backups in case my new system ever failed. Every time I saw them, I remembered that terrible week when the temperature dropped and humanity should have risen to meet it, but instead had been strangled by bureaucracy and greed. The Meadowbrook Hills I lived in now was different, better. The new HOA actually seemed to care about residents rather than just rules. They'd installed backup generators for the heating system. They'd established emergency protocols for extreme weather. They'd hired a new property management company that prioritized maintenance over profit margins. But the scars remained. Every winter when the first major snow fell, I saw people checking their heating systems nervously, stocking up on emergency supplies, making sure they had backup plans. The trauma of that storm had left its mark on the entire community. I ran into Patricia's former assistant, Sandra, at a coffee shop in town one day. She'd quit her job with the HOA immediately after Patricia's arrest and now worked at a nonprofit. We got to talking and she apologized for the role she'd played. "I was just doing my job," she said, "but that's not an excuse. I knew the heating system was failing. I fielded all those complaints from residents. I should have spoken up." "Patricia probably would have fired you," I said. "Maybe. But at least no one would have died." We talked for a while longer, and she told me something I hadn't known. Apparently, Patricia had tried to cut a deal with the prosecutor, offering to testify against other HOA presidents in Montana who were running similar schemes. The prosecutor had refused because they didn't have enough evidence to pursue those cases yet, but it showed how widespread the problem might be. "There are probably dozens of HOAs doing the same thing," Sandra said. "Taking kickbacks, ignoring maintenance, squeezing residents for every penny while their properties fall apart. That's depressing." "Yeah, but at least in this case someone got caught. Sometimes that's all you can hope for." I thought about that a lot in the following months. How many other Roberts were out there, suffering in silence because they were afraid to challenge authority? How many other communities were one disaster away from tragedy because the people in charge cared more about money than people? The answer was probably more than I wanted to know. Spring came eventually, as it always does in Montana. The snow melted, revealing brown grass and the debris of winter. People emerged from their homes like groundhogs, pale and grateful for the sun. The community organized a neighborhood cleanup day, and dozens of residents turned out to pick up trash, repair fences, and generally try to make Meadowbrook Hills look less like a war zone. I spent the morning working on my front yard, raking up dead leaves and branches. Helen was doing the same next door, and we worked in companionable silence for a while. "You know what the worst part is?" she said eventually. "What's that?" I actually liked Patricia at first. When I first moved here, she seemed competent and organized. She kept the neighborhood nice. The rules seemed reasonable, at least on the surface. "Power corrupts," I said, immediately feeling stupid for using such a cliché, but Helen nodded. "It really does." She started out trying to do a good job, and somewhere along the way, she forgot that rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. "You're giving her too much credit. She was taking kickbacks." "True. But I wonder if she started taking them before or after she stopped seeing us as people." It was a good question. Did greed lead to dehumanization, or did dehumanization lead to greed? Probably a bit of both. Summer brought new residents to Meadowbrook Hills. A young couple with twins moved into Robert's old house. I introduced myself and warned them about the community's history, wanting to make sure they knew what they were getting into. "We heard about it," the husband said. His name was Marcus, ironically the same as my friend, though they were different people. "It's actually one reason we bought here. The property was undervalued because of the scandal, and the new HOA seems really committed to not repeating past mistakes." "Just don't ever let them tell you that you can't heat your house," I said. He laughed, but I wasn't entirely joking. That fall, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I hadn't wanted to run, but Jason convinced me that people who'd been through the crisis needed to be involved in making sure it never happened again. So I threw my hat in the ring and won easily. My first board meeting was surreal. We met in the same office where Patricia used to hold court, though we'd redecorated to make it less oppressive. The agenda included mundane items like approving the landscaping budget and discussing a proposal to repave some of the streets. But we also spent significant time reviewing the heating system maintenance reports and discussing the emergency preparedness plan. The preventable tragedy that had claimed Robert's life had fundamentally changed how the HOA operated. We would never again take safety for granted. During the meeting, someone brought up a complaint about a resident who was allegedly parking an RV on his property in violation of the bylaws. "So, what do we do?" one board member asked. "We talk to him," I said. "We explain the rule and ask if there's a reason he needs to park there. Maybe his garage isn't big enough. Maybe he's about to take it on a trip. We work with him to find a solution that makes sense. And if he refuses to move it, then we assess whether this is really a hill worth dying on. Is one RV parked on one property hurting anyone? Is it worth fining someone and starting a conflict over something that doesn't matter?" The other board members nodded. This was the new philosophy. Empathy first, enforcement second. Rules were guidelines, not weapons. Winter came around again, and with it, the inevitable anxiety. The weather forecast started predicting cold temperatures and snow, and I saw people stocking up at the hardware store, buying space heaters and generators and emergency supplies. "Post-traumatic stress," Helen said when I mentioned it. "We all have it now." She was right. The entire community was traumatized, hypervigilant about anything that might lead to another crisis. But the new heating system worked beautifully. Even when temperatures dropped below zero, my house stayed at a steady 70 degrees. No space heaters needed, though I kept them just in case. There was one more storm that winter, not as severe as the one the year before, but enough to trigger memories. The power stayed on, the heat worked, and everyone was fine. But I noticed people checking on their neighbors more, making sure everyone was okay. The crisis had brought the community together in a way that years of HOA-mandated social events never had. I drove past the cemetery one afternoon and decided on impulse to visit Robert's grave. It was a simple headstone. Robert Chen, beloved father and grandfather, died too soon. Someone had left flowers recently, probably his daughter. I stood there for a few minutes, not really knowing what to say. "We fixed it," I finally said out loud, feeling foolish but needing to say something. "The heating system, the HOA, all of it. I'm sorry it came too late for you." The wind blew snow across the cemetery, and I pulled my coat tighter. My warm coat, because I could afford a good one now thanks to the settlement money. Ironic that Robert's death had financially benefited me. It felt wrong. I donated half of my settlement to a charity in Robert's name, one that helped elderly people with home repairs and utility bills. It wasn't enough, but it was something. As I walked back to my car, my phone rang. It was Helen. "Turn on the news," she said. "Channel 7. I got in my car and pulled up the news on my phone. The story was about another HOA in Billings that had been charged with similar offenses to what Patricia had done. They'd been neglecting maintenance on a swimming pool, and a child had nearly drowned when a drain cover came loose. The parallels were obvious. They're calling it the Meadowbrook effect, Helen said. Prosecutors all over Montana are looking at HOAs now, investigating complaints that used to be ignored. That's good, right? It's very good. Your fight with Patricia started something bigger than you realized. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a while, watching the snow fall. The Meadowbrook effect. It sounded like something from a movie, not real life. But real life was strange sometimes. I thought about how this had all started, with a petty woman on a power trip demanding I remove a space heater from my house. Such a small, stupid thing. And it had spiraled into death, criminal charges, community trauma, and apparently a statewide reckoning with HOA power. Butterfly effect, I suppose. Small actions leading to enormous consequences. I drove home through the snowy streets, past houses with lights in the windows and smoke from chimneys. People were warm and safe, going about their evening routines. It was such a simple thing, being warm in winter. So basic. And yet it had almost been taken from us by someone who thought rules mattered more than lives. Never again, I thought. Not here. Not on my watch. The years passed. Patricia served her time and was released on parole. I heard she moved to Wyoming and took a job doing administrative work for some company. I hoped she'd learned something, but I doubted it. People like that rarely changed. Gerald ended up doing community service and probation. Last I heard, he was working at a hardware store and keeping his head down. The other board members faded back into obscurity. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA continued its reforms. Jason served as president for 3 years and did an excellent job. When he finally stepped down, I took over, reluctantly but feeling obligated to see the work through. Under our leadership, the HOA became something different, a community organization focused on helping residents rather than controlling them. We maintained common areas, organized social events, and helped coordinate services like snow removal and landscaping. But we stopped treating homeowners like subjects in Patricia's kingdom. The space heater rule was officially removed from the bylaws, along with dozens of other petty regulations that served no real purpose. We streamlined the rules down to basics. Maintain your property, don't disturb your neighbors, pay your dues. Everything else was personal choice. It was amazing how much easier everything was when we stopped trying to micromanage people's lives. Robert's daughter visited occasionally, usually around the anniversary of his death. We'd established a memorial fund in his name that helped elderly residents with home maintenance and safety improvements. It was small, but it made a difference. "Thank you for this," she told me one year. "It means a lot knowing that something good came from what happened to Dad." "He deserved better," I said. "Yes, he did. But you gave him justice. That's worth something." I wasn't sure about that. Justice wouldn't bring Robert back or undo the suffering he'd experienced in his final hours, but it was all we had. 5 years after the storm, I finally sold my house in Meadowbrook Hills. Not because I was unhappy actually. The community had become a genuinely pleasant place to live. But I got a job offer in Seattle that was too good to pass up, and it was time for a change. The new owner was a young software engineer who worked remotely. During the home inspection, he noticed my independent heating system and the space heaters in the closet. "Why do you have all this extra heating?" he asked. I told him the story, all of it. He listened with wide eyes, occasionally interrupting with questions or exclamations of disbelief. "That's insane," he said when I finished. "An HOA actually let someone die over a space heater. It's more complicated than that, but essentially yes." "Well, I'm keeping all of this," he said, gesturing at the heaters. "Just in case, smart man." We finalized the sale and I packed up my belongings. On my last day in Montana, I drove through Meadowbrook Hills one final time. The neighborhood looked good, well-maintained, peaceful, alive with people going about their lives. I passed Robert's old house, now occupied by the family with twins who were now rambunctious kindergartners playing in the front yard. I passed Helen's house, where she was working in her garden. I passed Patricia's old house, sold years ago to a nice retired couple who knew nothing of its history. Everything looked normal, like the nightmare had never happened, but I knew better. The people who'd lived through it would never forget. The reforms we'd implemented would remain as long as people remembered why they mattered. History has a way of being forgotten, though. In 10 years, 20 years, would anyone remember Robert Chen? Would they remember Patricia Hendricks and her corruption? Or would new board members slowly start adding back rules, restrictions, fines? Would the cycle repeat itself? I hoped not. I really did. But hope wasn't enough. Vigilance was required. Constant, exhausting vigilance to prevent those in power from abusing it. As I drove away from Meadowbrook Hills for the last time, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that I was leaving behind the trauma of that terrible winter. Sadness that it had happened at all, and that my departure meant one less person actively working to prevent it from happening again. But life moves on. New challenges await. All we can do is learn from the past and try to do better. I never did use those space heaters in my new place in Seattle. The heating there worked perfectly, and the winters were mild compared to Montana. But I kept them anyway, stored in a closet, a reminder of what had happened and why it mattered. Sometimes the smallest things, a portable heater, a power-hungry HOA president, a winter storm, combine in just the right way to expose fundamental truths about people and systems. Patricia's greed and petty tyranny had been enabled by a structure that gave her too much power with too little oversight. Robert's death was the inevitable result of that combination, but his death also sparked change. Real, meaningful change that spread beyond one neighborhood to affect HOA governance across an entire state. Prosecutors paid attention. Legislators introduced bills. People started questioning the authority they'd blindly accepted. One life lost, but countless others potentially saved by the reforms that followed. It was cold comfort, I'm sure, to Robert's family. But it was something. I settled into my new life in Seattle, working my new job, making new friends. But I never forgot Montana, Meadowbrook Hills, or the winter that changed everything. How could I? It had fundamentally altered how I viewed authority, rules, and the responsibility we have to stand up when those in power abuse their position. Years later, I got an email from Helen. She was writing a book about the experience, working with Robert's daughter to ensure his story was told accurately and completely. She wanted my input on certain details and my permission to use my story. I gave it gladly. The more people who knew what happened, the less likely it was to happen again somewhere else. That was the hope anyway. The book was published 2 years later and became a regional bestseller. It told the full story, the systemic failures, the corruption, the tragedy, and the reforms that followed. It named names and didn't pull punches. Patricia tried to sue for defamation but lost because everything in the book was factually accurate and based on court records. Helen sent me a signed copy. On the dedication page it read, "For Robert Chen, and for everyone who has suffered under petty tyranny, may we all have the courage to say enough." I kept the book on my shelf, next to my collection of space heaters, a physical reminder of a chapter of my life that had been both terrible and transformative. In the end, that's what it came down to. A heater, a storm, and the courage to fight back against injustice. Small things that became big things. Personal struggles that became community movements. One man's death that became a catalyst for change. It shouldn't have taken a tragedy. The system should have worked without someone dying. But that's not the world we live in. Too often, change only comes when the cost of the status quo becomes unbearable, so we remember. We tell the stories, we stay vigilant, and we never, ever let someone tell us that rules matter more than lives. That's Robert's legacy. That's what his death bought us. And I'd be damned if I'd let anyone forget it.